Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mary Bingham, and I am the 9 times great-granddaughter of John and Sarah Wilds, and I'm the one who makes the videos for this YouTube channel. So upon request of a descendant of John and Priscilla Wilds, John's first wife, I was asked to provide detailed information regarding what happened to their daughter Sarah after her own arrest for witchcraft in 1692. The details were too lengthy to write out in a Facebook post, so I decided to put together this video. Sarah Wilds was born about the year 1651 at Topsfield, Massachusetts. Sadly, her mother Priscilla died April of 1663, and her father married Sarah Averill in November of that same year. Sarah married Edward Bishop Jr. about 1670. It is believed they had 12 children, with the oldest, Edward, being in his early 20s in 1692. Sarah and Edward lived in Salem Village, currently Danvers, Massachusetts, and their house still stands on Conant Road. Edward was hauled into court several times for operating an unlicensed tavern from their home. I guess the Bishop House was considered to be the party house of the neighborhood, as patrons drank and gambled, playing shovelboard well into the night. Shovelboard was a popular game in England and made its way over with the colonists. Back then, it was mostly played in taverns when people tossed either game pieces or coins to the opposite end of the table. About the year 1686, Christian Trask got so fed up with the events taking place next door that she marched over to the bishops and tossed the shovelboard game into the fire. This act could be considered by some as rather courageous because Sarah and Edward were known to retaliate against those neighbors who complained to them personally. For example, once they instructed some of their children to abuse the swine of a different neighbor who confronted them. Christian Trask continued to be troubled by the activities next door and received counseling from the Reverend John Hale of Beverly. Christian told him that Sarah was, quote, not fit to receive the Lord's Supper, end quote. Reverend Hale listened to Christian's story and, upon his own investigation, discovered that the accusations against the bishops were true. He alluded that the quote-unquote disorders were stopped, thus preventing further corrupt behavior at their home. According to her husband, John Trask, Christian suffered an onset of some type of mental illness the following night, which she suffered periodically until she sadly took her own life. John Hale fasted and prayed at her side during these episodes. Reverend Hale may have seen her in some of the same type of fits as some of the accusers, which they exhibited several years later. John Hale testified in 1692 that it was when he saw the accusers doing so or acting so that he then believed that Christian was bewitched before her own death. Oddly enough, just before Christian took her own life, she made amends with Sarah and sought Edward's forgiveness for throwing his shuffleboard into the fire. About a year before that happened, in 1685, Elizabeth Balch and Abigail Walden traveled from Salem to Beverly on the day of Captain George Corwin's burial. Suddenly, Edward, with Sarah in pursuit, and I'm assuming Sarah was riding on her own horse, so they approached Elizabeth Balch and Abigail Walden rather fast. So fast that Sarah wound up in the brook, and she blamed her husband out loud. So the bishops gathered themselves and rode alongside Elizabeth and Abigail, and Sarah remained quiet while Edward complained endlessly about his wife that thinks she was an awful wife from the day they got married. He said that Sarah was sometimes possessed by the devil, chatting with him all night at times. Even when Elizabeth and Abigail chastised Edward for speaking ill of Sarah to them, he would not zip it until they finally reached the bishop's house. Edward was of like mind with John Proctor regarding how the accusers in 1692 should be cured of their fits. The day when Edward was first accused was April 11th, and obviously 1692. As a group were traveling home from Salem after witnessing a day of the proceedings. It seems that Edward and John Indian were sharing a horse that Edward was riding. John must have been sitting in back with his hands tightly bound when he started to convulse. Then he ground his teeth into Edward's back to prevent himself from falling off the horse. Edward proceeded to whip John until the convulsions stopped and said that he could make these behaviors stop by beating them out of the accusers. As the travelers approached the fork in the road, one of them, and I quote, called out upon Edward. April 21st, the warrant was issued, which included Sarah and Edward Bishop, as well as her stepmother, Sarah Wilds, amongst others. Sarah and Edward were delivered to Nathaniel Ingersoll's tavern and appeared the next day at the Salem Village Meeting House for their pretrial examinations. Sadly, those documents are not known to exist. Sarah and Edward were held at the Salem jail after the examinations, along with Sarah's stepmother. Just before their transfer to the Boston jail on May 13th, they make a testimony regarding Mary Warren, who was then accused of being a witch. And I'm going to read that account directly from A Storm of Witchcraft by Emerson Baker. And those of you that are looking for it in your books, it actually starts at the bottom of page 115. Edward and Sarah Bishop and Mary Esty, and later Mary English, testified that when they were jailed with Warren, she said that the judges should take no notice of what the girls said. She warned that when, and I quote, I was afflicted, I thought I saw the apparition of 100 persons, end quote. But, and again I start a quote, her head was distempered, end quote. At the time, and, quote, she could not tell what she said, end quote. Yet, and again another quote, when she was well again, she could not say that she saw any of the apparitions at the time aforesaid. So while dissemble could mean to deceive, it could also mean to disguise or to pretend. Warren believed she had been distracted, that is, suffering from some sort of mental illness, when she experienced her own symptoms. She assumed the other bewitched suffered similarly. Perhaps a case of mass hysteria? Now that she was well, Mary tried to set the record straight, but in doing so, she questioned the legitimacy of the testimony of them all. So though Sarah is in jail, accusations still came her way. Ann Putnam Sr. supposedly spoke with a specter or spirit of Rebecca Nurse, who said that she, along with her sister Sarah Cloyce and Sarah Bishop, killed John Putnam's infant daughter the previous April 15th to be exact. In reality, the infant suffered violently from an unknown illness beginning 2 days prior on April 13th and sadly succumbed 2 days later. John Putnam said his baby daughter was bewitched and believed that Rebecca and Sarah Cloyce bewitched the baby because their mother was a witch. And A video on that supposed accusation will be forthcoming at some point. Sarah and Edward remained in the Boston jail. Sarah's stepmother, Sarah Wilds, transferred to Ipswich, and then she was transferred back to Salem before she was hanged on July 19th. So sometime just before October 7th, the bishops somehow escape and go into hiding. Exactly how they escape and where they escape to, I do not know. If some of you do know, can you please make a comment below? And it seems that Sheriff George Corwin paid 2 visits to the Bishop farm prior to their escape to confiscate cattle to offset the jail fees which they owed. Their son Edward actually helped Corwin on that second visit as he held down the 3 of the 4 cattle for branding that they planned to confiscate that day. The 4th cow got away because a boil burst on Edward's thigh, causing such pain that the cow was able to free itself. Gossip traveled quickly as people believed the specters of Sarah and Edward freed the cow because Edward Jr. was slow to testify for his parents. After all, he was married to a Putnam. Between these 2 visits, a total of 6 cows, 40 sheep, and some swine were seized and were never returned, leaving the Bishop children, who survived living on the farm, in need. After the Bishop's escape, their son Samuel borrowed 10 pounds to pay the fine to avoid yet another confiscation. Sarah and Edward were not hiding long. The family was back in Salem when Edward appeared in court again in January of 1693 for operating an unlicensed tavern. The bishops moved to Rehoboth, Massachusetts in 1703, most likely because that was considered to be a more liberal community. It remains a mystery to historians such as Emerson Baker as to why they waited so long to make the move. Most of the families who moved away did so shortly after the trials were over. Before Edward died in 1711, he petitioned the court for reimbursement to his estate, requesting the sum of 100 pounds for the time he and Sarah were imprisoned. In his petition, he stated they were in jail a total of 37 weeks, when in reality, in my estimation and in my calculations, it was closer to 24 weeks. If you go back and look at from April 22nd to October 7th, it's about 24 weeks. Edward also leads the court to believe all 12 of his children were living at home during 1692. However, according to author Marilyn Roach, some of their children were actually married and another child had died previously. The actual amount the bishops were reimbursed is not known, but they were reimbursed. So someone asked if Sarah Bishop would have seen her father or visited the Wilds family when they returned from hiding. I wish I knew the answer for sure. However, I can speculate that Sarah may have visited her father, as Salem was not too far from Topsfield. Since John was 74 years old and settling into married life again with Mary Jacobs in 1693, he probably did not travel to Rehoboth. Sarah may have returned home for her father's burial in 1705. What is very probable, however, is that John and Ephraim Wild saw Sarah and Edward Bishop while they were incarcerated, as they were jailed with Sarah Wilds for at least 2 months before Sarah Wilds transferred to the Ipswich jail. It is documented that John and Ephraim traveled to these jails at least once a week to provide for their wife and mother. Because their own estate suffered a great monetary loss, they may not have visited Sarah and Edward after Sarah Wilde's execution. Travel may have also been physically hard for the aging John Wildes. So thank you again for watching, and please click on the thumbs up if you liked the video. Please comment below any questions or added information you have regarding the Bishop family. Subscribe to my channel and click on the notification button. You may also like my videos of Sarah Bishop's stepmother titled Sarah Wilde, Story of a Colonial Woman, Part 1, The Ipswich Years, and Part 2, The Topsfield Years. I will include a link in the description so that you can see what the Bishop House looks like today on Conant Road. Thank you again.